Parashat Tzav. One of the most difficult elements of the Torah is the phenomenon of animal sacrifice, for obvious reasons. First, the Jews and Judaism survived without them for over 2,000 years. Second, virtually all the prophets were critical of sacrifices, not least Jeremiah, which is in this week's Haftarah, but none of the prophets wanted to abolish sacrifices, but they're severely critical of those who sacrifice to God, while at the same time exploiting and oppressing their fellow men. What disturbs them, or what disturbed God, in which in his name they were communicating, was that some people saw sacrifices as a bribe. If we give God a big enough, generous gift, maybe you overlook our crime and injustice, and this idea is radically incompatible with Judaism. Along with monarchy, sacrifices were the least distinctive things about Judaism in the ancient past. Every ancient religion, every cult, every sect had its altars and sacrifices. So what does sacrifices mean in a religion where there's one God, the creator of everything? This week's parasha, Tzav, talks about various types of sacrifices. But as we discussed, the Haftarah of Jeremiah gives an almost incomprehensible remark. It says, "For when I brought your ancestors out of Egypt and spoke to them, I did not give them commandments about burnt offerings and sacrifices, but I gave them this command: obey me, and I'll be your God, and you will be my people. Walk in obedience to all I command you, that I may go well with you." This seemed to suggest that sacrifices were not part of God's original intention for the Israelites, and this seems to negate the very substance of the parasha. This entire sequence, from Exodus 25 to Leviticus 25, is all in response to the episode of the golden calf. As we discussed, this prompted the building of the Mishkan because the people needed a representation of God where they could feel that God is close, not distant, in the camp, not at the top of the mountain, accessible to everyone, not just Moses, and on a daily basis, not just in extreme miracles. This was the tabernacle, the services represented. It was the homes of Shekhinah, the divine presence. As we learned in the past, Shekhinah has the same root of Shachin, neighbor, and every sacrifice, korban, comes from the root of karov, of closeness. Korban means that which is brought near, the act of coming close. So in the tabernacle, God came close to the Israelites, and in bringing sacrifices, the people became close to God. This is what Jeremiah is saying. It was not God's original idea, per se. The idea was that the people obey his laws, not that they bring sacrifices on a regular basis. God does not need the sacrifices, but God responded to the people's wish. Much like in Mount Sinai when they told God that the voice of God was overwhelming, what brings people close to God has not to do with God, but with the people. As Jeremiah put this in the closing verse of the Haftarah, "I am the Lord, who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth. For in these I delight." What delights God is not sacrifices, but the love and devotion that drives it. Which brings us to the heart of the matter. What is sacrifice? Why is it important even today as an idea? The simplest yet profound answer: we love what we're willing to make sacrifices for. This is why, when a nation of shepherds and farmers, Israel, demonstrated their love for God by giving him a gift of their flocks and herds, their grain and fruit, their livelihood. To love is to thank. To love is to want to bring an offering to the beloved. To love is to give. Sacrifice, the choreography of love. This is true in many aspects of life. A happy married couple is constantly making sacrifice for one another. Parents make huge sacrifices for their children. People drawn to a calling, to heal the sick, to care for the poor, or fight for justice, often sacrifice a career for the sake of their ideals. A patriot makes sacrifices for their country. In strong communities, people make sacrifices for one another. Sacrifices are the glue in the relationship. It bonds us to one another. This is why sacrifices were so important in the biblical age. Because the beating heart of Judaism is love. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. In other cultures, the motivation behind sacrifices was fear. Fear of the anger of the gods. But in Judaism, it was love. Again, the key word of sacrifice, korban, is to bring close. The name of God that is referenced every time in connection to sacrifices is Hashem, not Elohim. Hashem, which expresses the aspect of God of love and compassion, not Elohim, which is God in an aspect of awe and distance. Where there is love, there is sacrifice. And once we realize this, we see how deeply relevant sacrifices are today. Modern Western societies are built on the model of the rational pursuit of self-interest. In other words, every individual acts to maximize their own benefit, and there's nothing wrong with this model. However, the problem arises when it is extended from politics and economics into communities and families and negates the possibility of altruism. After several decades, this is ever clear. This idea of love as sacrifice has grown thin. In many areas, we see this, specifically in relationships throughout the West. Fewer people are getting married. They're getting married later, and half of marriages end in divorce. Throughout Europe, indigenous populations are in decline. To have a stable population, a country must have a birth rate of 2.1 per female, but the average birth rate in the European Union is 1.34. In Spain, it's even worse. 1.1. That's why the population of Europe is rendered stable only because unprecedented rates of immigration. Lose the concept of sacrifice within a society, and sooner or later, marriages fail, peoplehood declines, and society slowly ages and dies. As Rabbi Lord Jakubowicz said, in the Talmud, it says, when a man divorces his wife, the altar sheds tears. What is the connection between the altar and marriage? Both, he said, are about sacrifices. Marriages fail when the partners are unwilling to sacrifice for one another. This is not a new problem. Judaism faced its version 2,000 years ago. Not the erosion of sacrifice within marriage, but the loss of sacrifice altogether. When the temple was destroyed, it was not obvious how to proceed. The instrument that allowed the people to express their love for God, to draw near to Him, seemed to disappear overnight. What happened next was a transformational moment. Rather than clinging to the past or surrendering to despair, the sages understood what mattered was never the form, the altar, the animal, the fire, but the inner expression, the expression of love through giving, the desire to be close to God, and that love cannot be destroyed by destruction of any building. And so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and the sages reminded the people of different expressions: prayer, study, and tzedakah. Prayer, through shacharit, mincha, and musaf, took place as a regular offering in the temple. Study, one who studies the laws of sacrifice, it is as if he sacrificed. And one who gives charity. Charity is seen as a financial sacrifice, acknowledging that all that we have belongs to God. The motive is the same. Sacrificing is an expression of love. It is a gift we bring to whom we love. Where people make sacrifices for their ideals stay strong. A society that loses their willingness to sacrifice slowly loses everything that makes it worth living in it. Judaism has always known this, and it is telling that today Israel has by far the highest birth rate in any OECD country, more than double the European average, 2.9 children per female. This is not a coincidence. This is a culture that believes in commitment, in giving, in building something beyond yourself. This is who we are called to be, to not merely remember the sacrifices of the past, but to make our own. For our families, our community, our people, and for the entire world who still needs mending. The altar is gone, but the call to give, to draw close, to love, has never been louder. Shabbat Shalom.